Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sweatpants BI. It's me, Sean. It has been several months, I think, since I last posted content on my channel. I got really overwhelmed over the past couple of months dealing with a lot going on in my day job at Humana. My wife and I just moved from Louisville, Kentucky to Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is a smaller city about 2 hours south of where we lived previously. And then, of course, we got into the holidays here in the US with Thanksgiving and Christmas. We just had a ton going on. So, because of that, for my own mental health and just to make sure that I was making enough time for my family and primarily my cats, Misha and Nuna, I just decided to put Sweatpants BI on hold for a couple of months, but I'm circling back now and I'm really thrilled to release a new full-length Power BI walkthrough that I built as part of my brand new Udemy class, Microsoft Power BI Portfolio in a Day. In my new Udemy class, I'm giving my students 4 full-length guided walkthroughs of 4, I think, pretty fun Power BI projects that run the gamut from a market research data set to the data set that I'm going to be showing you in this tutorial, to an HR data set that I've also used previously on this channel, and also a housing insights and real estate data set, very akin to something that you might find from like a Zillow or a Realtor.com, focused on thousands of properties that are available in the area around Austin, Texas. So lots of really good content in that new Udemy course if you're trying to build out your portfolio, or if you're just kind of learning the ropes of building and developing Power BI reports that don't just contain a number of compelling insights, but are also feature-rich with all kinds of different interactivity options that like bookmarks and tooltips that are pretty much par for the course for Power BI, and also a ton of different data visualization techniques to ensure that your insights are captivating and also that your reports look aesthetically and cosmetically appealing. So we're not just building, really insightful reports, but we're also building reports that are pleasing to the eye. So I'm really excited to release my 3rd Udemy course here in the first month of 2024. I hope that you'll check it out. But if you think, Udemy's not really my thing, or I'm looking for free content, no problem. I 100% understand. That's why I'm thrilled to release one of the tutorials from that new class here on YouTube on my Sweatpants BI YouTube channel for free. In this tutorial, we're going to be working with a coffee sales data set that has been floating around in various forms, I think, with some of the other BI companies. I decided the data set needed a little bit of personality, so I created my own hypothetical company called Kraken Koffee. And I gave this data set more of a nautical theme by telling ChatGPT, hey, generate some ocean and pirate and nautical themed names for some of these coffee products. Some of those names are pretty cheesy, I'm not gonna lie, but it's definitely a huge boon to me to be able to use something like ChatGPT to generate, a more fun version of a data set to release to you all, to also help me build out what I think is my first full-length infographic walkthrough that I've built on this channel. I personally love building infographics in Power BI. I've developed a ton for different Power BI competitions that are out there, but I don't think that I've ever walked through one from start to finish to share with you. So I'm really thrilled to release this Kraken Koffee infographic tutorial for you over the coming weeks, just to sort of, show you what the content in my Udemy course is like. Or if you're just, looking to flex your creative muscles with an infographic, here's some videos that you can follow along with on my Sweatpants BI YouTube channel. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our Kraken Koffee dataset and get to work on our infographic. So as always, the very first thing that we're going to do for our new infographic report is we're going to connect to our Kraken Koffee data. So let's go ahead and head up here to our Power Query editor, which is where we're going to grab a new source, and we're going to perform, not too many transformations, but a fair number of transformations on this data set, just to make our lives a little bit easier when it comes time to building this report. So let's go ahead and head up here to new source, and I believe we're connecting to a CSV file. CSV or Excel, it doesn't really matter. Connecting to either one is pretty similar here. So there is our window where we're going to access our file. We're going to go over here to data, and it looks like I was correct. It was a CSV file. Here's our Kraken Koffee sales data set. And I'm going to go ahead and connect to this that looks right. You can all see it's not a very complex data set, which is one reason why we're building an infographic from it, because there's honestly just not enough here to necessarily warrant building a full-blown report. It's basically just, transactions, the date and time of the transaction, where the transaction took place, and you can see there's some store information here, and then what product was sold and at what price was it sold. Pretty standard stuff. So we're going to go ahead and connect to this. And one thing that I am noticing right out of the gate about this data set is that I do have some ID columns here. You'll notice I have a store ID column and then a location that corresponds with each unique store ID. So you can see that store 5 is always Orlando, store 8 is always Tampa, and I don't know if I can find a good example scrolling down, but there we go. Store 3 is always Miami. So these store IDs are unique identifiers for each store location here. I also have a product ID that identifies each unique product. And you can see that there are also some different levels of product that get increasingly more detailed as you scroll from left to right. You can see I've got a very high level category for all of our products. And you can see I've got different kinds of coffee. If I hover over this first coffee example, the next product type is gourmet brewed coffee. And then this Cthulhu blend regular is the very most specific type of product. This is the actual product detail. And then there's another coffee example down here where the product type is drip coffee, and it looks like the specific product detail is coral reef blend small. And you can see it kind of repeats for everything here. So for product category, I've got, maybe about 10 values here. For product type, looks like there are, far more, maybe 25 to 30 values. And then for product detail, if I load all of these values, you can see that there are about 80 values here that actually name the specific types of products here. So what we're going to do is, instead of just loading this data set into the front end, and I'll show you what I mean first before I demonstrate this. Let's go ahead and close and apply, and you can see a little window that's going to pop up here where Power BI connects to the CSV file. It's got all, 100 and almost 50,000 rows of data. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to right-click on Kraken Koffee sales, and I'm actually going to uncheck Enable Load. I'm going to disable the load here. And I get, a pop-up here that says possible data loss warning, disabling load's going to remove the table from the report. And that's actually fine. This is what I want. So I'm just going to hit continue. And now notice when I hit close and apply, my data set up here vanishes. It says I don't have any data yet. And yet, if I go back to the Power Query editor, that file is still there in the background. It hasn't gone anywhere. I'm just not bringing it into the front end of the report. And the reason that I'm doing this is that just keeping a disabled copy of my source data is going to give me something that I can reference in building out my data model. So every time I'm building out a new table from this data set, I'm just going to keep referencing. And when I say referencing, I'm going to right click here and I'm just going to reference my source data, which is not loading to the front end. So let's go ahead and reference my Kraken Koffee sales, and I'm going to call this table Kraken Koffee Fact. And this Kraken Koffee Fact table is just going to contain a handful of columns from my data set. I'm actually going to spin off my store information into its own table, and I'm also going to spin my product information off into its own table. So let's start with our store data first. For my store data, let's go ahead and reference our Kraken Koffee sales source data again. And you can see it's identical, right? It's identical to our source data. And right now it's called Kraken Koffee sales 2. But I'm going to go ahead and call this store dim. And I'm going to click on store ID, and I'm going to hold down control and click on store location so that I have both of those two columns highlighted. And I'm going to right click on any column here, and I'm going to select remove other columns. In other words, remove all of the columns that I don't have selected. Now you can see I'm just left with store ID and store location, and there's a ton of duplication in here. 150,000 rows of basically only 3 values, 5 for Orlando, 8 for Tampa, and 3 for Miami. So let's go ahead and just click on this little button over here, and we're going to remove all duplicates. And there's our store dim table. And now I'm going to go up to Kraken Koffee fact, and I can remove store location entirely from this fact table, because ultimately in the data model editor, I'm going to join store ID from my fact table to store ID from my store dim table to reference my store locations. We're going to do one more example of this, and we're going to use our product information. So let's go ahead and scroll all the way to the end here, and let's hold down Control and grab product ID, product category, product type, and product detail this time. And let's go ahead and right click on any column, remove other columns, and you'll see there's still some duplication in here. A little bit harder to find. I'm just going to order them. So if I order everything top to bottom by product ID, you'll notice I've got tons of ones, coffee beans. So let's go ahead and just click on our little icon up here that gives us table level controls. And let's remove all duplicates here so that now we have a unique product dim table. I like to be consistent. Let's make sure we're capitalizing dim. And this contains all of my unique products. So now we can go back to our Kraken Koffee fact table. And since we have our own product dim table, we no longer need to have separate product category, product type, and product detail columns in our fact table. Oops, hit the wrong one. Instead, let me just make sure I remove these columns. Instead, if we need to reference the descriptions of our products, we're just going to use our product ID, which will be joined to the product ID in our fact table to reference all of the information about our products. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a few new columns to our fact table. So right now we have transaction quantity and we have unit price. In other words, the price for each unique unit of this product that was sold. So you can see for this very first row here, 2 quantity of product 32 were sold at a price of $3 each. And here it looks like we had 1 of product 22 sold at a price of $2. So, ultimately in our report, we're going to want to get a sense of what total sales for this data set is, which is currently a little bit hard to get. So what we're going to do is I'm going to hold Control again. I'm going to hold transaction quantity, and I'm also going to select unit price. I'm going to go up here to add column, and I'm just going to use some standard math here. I'm going to drop down my standard math multiply, and I'm going to multiply my quantity field and my unit price field together to get the total value of each transaction in the table here. And Power BI has assigned this just a random name of multiplication. I can double click here and rename it, or I can go right here into the step where I inserted that multiplication here, where I multiplied quantity times unit price. In this part here in quotes, you'll notice that it matches the column name. This is where Power BI is automatically generating a column name for that calculation that we just did. So I'm just going to rename it within the step here, and I'm going to call this total sales. The next thing that I'm going to do is I have this transaction time here, and I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead to later in the tutorial where I'm going to use the hour of these transactions to try to get a sense of like when during the time of the day are we seeing the most sales come through. This is a coffee shop called Kraken Koffee. It probably makes sense to you right away that, a lot of the transactions for this data set are probably taking place in the morning when people drink a lot of coffee. Unless you're me, then you probably drink a lot of coffee from anywhere between 7 a.m. and 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But we will see how much of that bears true when we get to actually visualizing this data. But having already, worked with this data set before, I know that I'm going to build a visual later on with just the hour of that transaction. So let's go ahead and click on transaction time. I'm going to go up here to time, and you want to make sure that you're in add column. The difference between transform and add column is that if I go to transform and transaction time and add an hour, it's going to replace this transaction time column with the hour. And you can see it just did that. And there's where I extracted the hour from my transaction time. We don't want to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that step. Let's go back to add column. And now I'm going to go down to time, hour, and add hour. And now you can see that my hour appears as its own column, and I still have transaction time over here. So we're just going to leave that called hour. You can see I've got whole numbers. So there's 7 for all of my 7 a.m. transactions, 8 for all of my 8 a.m. transactions, and so on and so forth. Hopefully you know how time works if you're building Power BI reports, so I'm not going to dwell on it. Something else that might be useful for this data set is to have a date column that contains some date attributes that we don't have in our data set. Things like, a column that has Jan, Feb, Mar, or January, February, March for all of our months in our transaction dates. Maybe we want to strip out just the quarters or the day of the week, things like that. So let's go ahead and go back up here to our Kraken Koffee sales source data set. And I'm going to go ahead and reference this data set again, and I'm going to get rid of everything except for transaction date. So I'm just going to click on transaction date, remove other columns, and I'm going to use this date column. I'm going to go ahead and remove all duplicates here. So I've got January 1, January 2, so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and call this date. And now I'm just going to go through super fast, and I'm just going to add some, date columns or date type columns or attributes that I think I might need when I get to the visualization part of this. So let's make sure we're here on add columns. Let's go to date. I'm going to go ahead and add month, which is going to return the numeric month, 1 for January, 2 for February. Let's go back over here and grab the name of the month. I'm going to use this month name column, and I'm going to add another column, and I'm going to go to extract here, and I'm going to extract the first 3 characters of my month names, which is going to give me Jan, Feb, Mar, April, I don't know. It's just the first 3 characters of my month names. The reason that I like to do this, and I usually call this column something like month name short, is, sometimes in your bar charts or line charts or visuals, you don't have so much space to work with, and every single pixel of your axis is vital. And sometimes you just can't fit January, February, March, April. Actually, those months get pretty easy. But October, November, December, you can't fit the whole names in the axis and have them still be readable. So I like to use just a 3-letter truncated version of the month name in a lot of my charts, just to make it a little bit easier to read without really losing anything. Next, let's go over here to the transaction date again, and let's add a column for the day of the week, which is going to be 1 through 7, of course, or I'm sorry, 0 through 6, just the way that Power BI indexes these. Not terribly important, though. So we've got 0 for our Sundays and 6 for our Saturdays. Even more important is, let's go ahead and grab the name of the day. And now we've got Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did just a minute ago with months. And let's go ahead and grab our day name column, and we're going to extract the first 3 characters again. And I'm going to call this column day name short. Very, very similar to what I did with month and month name short. And now I've at least got some additional columns that I can use in my data visuals for anything that I want to visualize that's kind of in a time series vein, or visualizing like sales or transactions or how customers are behaving, during an average work week, from day to day, over time, things like that. So I've got a very, very rough and simple date table that is derived directly from the transaction dates in my Kraken Koffee sales data set. So that's already got us in pretty good shape for visualizing our data. We can always pop back to the Power Query editor as needed to make additional updates. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and just head home. Let's go ahead and close and apply all of our new tables here. And when everything's done, let's head back to our data set and let's go ahead and call page 1 the Kraken Koffee infographic. There's all of our tables over here. And now it's time to start thinking about what we might actually want to visualize and what kind of stories might be interesting to tell from this fairly small data set for our infographic. Now, real quickly, I do want to just circle back to the data model. Now that we've committed all of our tables to the front end of the report builder, I'll be honest, this data model is so simple that I almost forgot to provide any kind of closure on it. And honestly, Power BI did a lot of the hard work for us. You can see if we go over here to the left to the model view, Power BI went ahead and hooked up the store dim and the product dim tables that we made on its own. We didn't have to do anything. It recognized that we have product ID in our product dim table and product ID in our Kraken Koffee fact table, and Power BI handled the join and created a relationship between those two tables. And it did the same thing over here for our store dim table. And you can see if I hover on the relationship, it joined store ID from store dim to store ID in our Kraken Koffee fact table. And if you're newer to Power BI and this is one of the first times that you're seeing a data model, you'll notice, on these relationships, there's a 1 for store ID in our store dim table, and there's the star, which indicates many, for the same relationship in our Kraken Koffee fact table. And you can see that it's the exact same situation over here for product ID. You have 1 on the side of our product dim table and the star or many symbol over here on our Kraken Koffee fact table. Now, one thing that Power BI did not handle was reconciling our date table with our data model. So what I'm going to do here real quickly, just for demonstration purposes, is I'm going to grab transaction date, and literally I'm just going to click on it, and you can see I've grabbed it. Everywhere I move now, I'm holding transaction date with my cursor, and I'm just going to drop transaction date from my date table on top of transaction date from my Kraken Koffee fact table. And you can see Power BI created another relationship, this time between the transaction date columns and my date and fact table. And you can see that this relationship is yet another one-to-many relationship. And if you're new to, think of like these types of model relationships and cardinality in a Power BI report, all this is saying is that each unique value in our 3-dimension tables here has one unique value that can be duplicated many times across our fact table. And that makes perfect sense, right? Remember when we first looked at the data set? Let's go back to our fact table. We only have 3 different stores where these transactions are taking place: Orlando, Tampa, and Miami. We have almost 150,000 transactions here, but those transactions can only take place at one of 3 stores, all incidentally located in Florida, where our Kraken Koffee shops are based. So we can see that, Orlando, Tampa, looks like all of these are maybe Orlando. I think there's Tampa, Miami's further down. So you can see that all of those transactions repeat multiple times. You can see I've got tons of 8s, tons of 3s, tons of 5s in this data set. But in my store dim table, I only have 1 value for each store ID and then the corresponding store location. So that's where the 1 comes from. I have 1 instance of Orlando, 1 instance of Tampa, and 1 instance of Miami for each item in my store dim, but those values could replicate or occur many times in my fact table. So, and it's the exact same situation for my product dim and for my date table. So I just wanted to quickly reference how the model is working and what's happening behind the scenes and how the relationships are talking across our 4 tables here, because I won't be spending a whole lot of time in the model viewer again in this specific tutorial. This is a very, very basic schema. Fact table, a couple of very small dimension tables. We've pretty much got everything that we're going to need from a model perspective done here. We're not going to have to worry about any performance implications or anything. Power BI is going to be able to handle this. So because I'm not going to be revisiting this again, probably in this infographic tutorial, just wanted to make sure that you're all clear on the relationships behind the scenes, especially if you're trying to follow along and you're building your own and for some reason maybe Power BI just twiddled its fingers instead of connecting all of these relationships, or maybe you've accidentally turned off the capability of Power BI to automatically detect these relationships, which is a thing. In that case, if you go over here and you don't see any of these relationships and you just see the 4 tables, all you have to do is just grab your store ID, for example, drop it on store ID, grab your product ID, drop it on product ID. You're just going to have to manually create those relationships. But I didn't want to take it for granted that for anybody who's watching this video, Power BI automatically built the model. So just want to make sure that you know how to build the model and hook everything up, just in case, because it is absolutely paramount for the visuals and everything else that we're going to do in the remainder of the lesson.